Hi, let's dive right in. A full day of modeling yesterday, Saturday, which was very good. It's been a while since I've done that. And I achieved a lot on this F-84 Thunderstreak, so I'm going to go through all of this. So I don't have the box, but that's the instruction and picture. Now, the slightly unique thing about this is one of those times when an aircraft comes across my path and firstly gets built fairly fast, like within a week or two of me getting it. But more importantly, it's an aircraft and kit that I've never looked at, don't really care about. It's not like I have any interest in the Thunderstreak, and yet I'm building one. Now, it's slightly appealing because you're not used to the shape, you don't really know anything about it, so you're learning a little bit, kit-wise and aircraft-wise. And of course, the reason that it has come across my path is it's sort of a salvage, and I quite like a salvage. So, let me run through everything that's happened. I don't know what those are. Would those be napalm or fuel tank? Anyway, there's these ones as well, which are probably the fuel tank. I'm not sure. Anyway, so you've got the slightly bigger external store, the smaller external store. A little bit of time spent as it's gluing, putting a bit of pressure on each side so that you can even get differences on each side, and then as you're pushing it, and then at the front this goes a bit off, so you've got to take the sandpaper and lightly sand it so that you're not feeling the ridge but the actual part proper, making sure that at the front you've got evenness, like running your nail over it, adjusting as it's drying. So anyway, that's pretty good. That's sprayed in a mix of aluminium and metallic black, simply because the metallic black was handy and my blacks always dry up. So this is a dark aluminium, which I quite like. I'm going to go through all the smaller parts first. So that's those as well. Now, probably, does it say anything in here? No, it doesn't tell you what those external stores are. There's the part breakdown, by the way. Cleaning up the what do you call them again? Pylons. Also sprayed in the same Humbrol aluminium. As I was looking at the wings, which when I showed you last were together, they're now not together anymore. And quite amazingly, even though superglue was not used, I was able to get this apart without breaking anything. So what happened there was I needed to spray that wheel bay, and I was sort of looking at the wing and I checked the straightness, and it wasn't. Both wings had anhedral. Now this is almost predictable because, I'll show you why again. When you've got this somewhat thicker aileron and flap molding, and then a surface on one side, that cooling is inevitably different, and the one side doesn't have the same amount of plastic, so you get this anhedral droop. Now right now I've given it a lot of extra, I've given it anti-bend, opposite bend, and I think we're there. I masked that little square where the undercarriage mounts to. So while I was busy sort of opposite bending it, obviously not being silly about it, but just trying to get a little bit of bend just to see. I wasn't really expecting it to hold, because once you've got two pieces glued forming somewhat of a beam engineering wise, you're unlikely to bend that to hold, whereas a single surface can. But then it started cracking the glue joint loose, and then I gave it a little bit of help, and no problem. Came off, cleaned up a little bit, cleaned up the surfaces, and that allowed me to then spray without having to, you know, mask this. And now that can get glued back, and I will have straight wings. Now the leading edge still has an ever so slight warp, but that that can be evened out so that as you're drying with the glue, you just put a little bit of anti-bend and that'll hold it beautifully. Okay, so that's done. Speak about that just now. This don't know where that piece is. Okay, so there was a little piece of plastic put in there to cover that nose wheel bay. Now that nose wheel bay is not molded to scale, and neither is a flat piece covering it to scale, because actually the space, the wheel is supposed to go into there. So really we're just putting a flat piece in there, and I'm not going to do anything more. And the reason is that there's actually lead inside there to keep the nose down. So even if you opened it up, you'd then be stuck with the nose weight problem again. And that's not a big deal. No one's going to lift this up. So there will be a little flat piece. It's painted green. I just didn't bring that out. While doing that, this cracked open a little bit. So obviously the glue that had been used in the gluing method was not great, which benefited me, and I've now glued it, and that's sort of ready. That goes into the tailpipe. That's just brass tube. That was already done. I did show you that. But looking through that into the fuselage obviously leaves you with a little bit of a problem. Now, even though it's dark, I did then decide, let's grab one of those old hubcaps. That has got that lovely turbine texture. Don't know what era hubcap that would be. And when that is there, even though it's chromed, I'm not even going to bother dechroming it. There's so little light, it actually looks perfectly like that. I did have to clip off the edge and file this down to the correct shape for the inside there. Slightly interesting story about hubcaps. Long ago in South Africa, by the roadside, when you went out of the cities, sometimes even in the cities, you'd have hubcap salesmen sitting by the side of the road. That's sort of the informal term. Just a guy who'd been picking up hubcaps for forever, and that was his means of income. Huge range of hubcaps, you know, 100 from any different type that you can imagine that had come off cars, because, you know, these heavier metal hubcaps, you go over a bump in the road or something and your hubcap can go rolling down the road. And so you had these, especially in the era of metal hubcaps, that sort of slowly disappeared, and I guess that's not even a thing anymore. So we have tailpipe, turbine. I've cleaned up and sprayed the undercarriage legs. Now, the insides are not green, from what I very quickly researched. So the bays are green, but the inside of the doors are silver. So that went down. Basically, silver is what you see, aluminium color. Okay, there's the state of the fuselage at the moment, all nicely cleaned up. Air brakes, when you put them in position, they were seated too low. So you can see now they are very nicely sort of flush. And for that, select a type of your styrene sheet that you think is closest to the amount of dip that you got. I can't remember what thickness this one was. Cut a little bit, test it to see, you know, cut it more or less to shape. It bends very easily. Press it in and see, and it was, my first go was great. So they've got full size plastic sort of insert glued to the air brake and then glued to the fuselage. Even though there's sort of a little bit of detail lines and that's good enough to glue in. A little bit of light sanding. Now there's very, very nice detail, which was raised detail. I don't know if you can see that. Lot and like how many would there be? Hundreds of little holes in that air brake, but they're not holes now because that was sanded off raised detail. Now they're only a visual effect. Now I didn't realize that at the first time, but the previous owner tried to drill out, which obviously immediately failed. So you'll see some of them are actually little holes and not remotely aligned or even the correct size, and there's no way you can drill out that. Those holes are very, very small. So that's on. Windows, those windows glued in. Not the easiest, and they came with 4 little tabs which slightly overlap the visual effect from the outside, and then you clip them off, but still it's not the easiest, but they do help in positioning that. Now what I have here is, this was most of the work, is the building of that cockpit. So we have floor, side shelves, side consoles. That piece was there. I didn't need to do anything about that, but I did know I almost fell for that trick. Slotting it exactly into the very minimal sort of little edge there that you can glue it onto, and then put these two together to look at whether that shelf was in fact, make sure it was going to correctly seat onto both sides, and looked from the top and it was not perfectly center. And that's because it doesn't, it usually, when something has to fit up to the maximum that it can, but it actually shouldn't have, it should have come a bit back. So luckily that went okay. The side shelves will allow for the ejection seat to go in there, and then I made the instrument panel. That was one of the last things, so that's that piece, which I've stuck over the very small piece, which was the kit instrument panel, which they don't have a decal for, neither is it even actually a panel. I'll just show you what the kit has for cockpit. So they have that back shelf thing, seat, which obviously I'm not using the seat, I'm using an ejection seat pilot, and that is the little tiny piece, which is actually more the upper shelf with the HUD on it. Does this even have one? Well, it's sort of built in, it's just a tiny little blobby there. So I'm quite happy with that, and the printed bits that I've done, once I've sort of done a little bit more work on the inside there, will actually give a beautiful but simple cockpit effect. Correct for the F-84, since it's an F-84 that I grabbed. If you're looking up to print that, it's actually quite easy. Just browse, various pics. There's just so much available, and if you really can't find the aircraft that you're looking for, just grab another one. I mean, honestly, with the view that you're going to see here, no one's even going to know the difference. The printed paper sticking onto there will be sort of good enough. So that's a number of hours, and I put in those windows before painting green because I didn't want to have to deal with paint being on the glued area. So Now these windows, they are a bit of a hassle, but you know, you can't seat them fully in because then they're actually a little bit too proud out. So you've got to get a little bit of glue in the correct areas, not get glue on the window on the inside, not touch it. Check how much you needed to push it back as it's sort of getting tacky and getting into the right position. And I'm putting an extra little bit of tube glue to form a little bit of solid bond. Just a little bit of fillet on the edge of the glue, on the edge of the window on the inside. Keep checking that it's sort of flush there, and that was okay. So I'll just show you the little tabs, which I think you'll be able to see. So right in the corner of the window, there we go, against the darker background. Right in the corner is a little tiny round tab, which I've then clipped off. That sort of holds it in position from going right through, but once it's glued you don't need that, but you do still see that little bit of tab. Now you can clean your window completely up before the time and sand it down to a nice smooth finish, but I wasn't going to bother with that. This is totally good enough. So next up, this is at the moment a matte, so that's Humbrol 76, which I think is a nice enough green, even if not an accurate green, it doesn't matter. Now that's going to get a gloss floor wax coat so that I can do, firstly so that the paper print can stick onto it nicely when I glue it on with glue, and also so that I can do a little bit of wash, giving a little bit of, you know, breaking up that absolute flat green surface in there. Now this aircraft has got somewhat of a wide cockpit compared to many jets. This has actually got not bad visibility. For a small jet, that's quite a good view inside, even with a canopy. And I think okay, this canopy has got a problem. You'll spot the problem immediately. Do you see that big blemish there? So what they've done is they have got two positioning tabs, which is always a very bad idea. They've got those two big positioning tabs, which causes a huge visual blemish. There you can see it a bit better there. A huge visual effect from the outside. So what I was going to say is, even though this cockpit will distort the view in, you'll be able to see the cockpit quite nicely up until I saw that those huge plastic moldings are there. You can mold this in, you can build this in the open position. I'm going to have to give a little bit of thought, because you can sand that, you can get that off. The question is, which one does more damage? Just having that there, or or all of the manipulation and work, and that'll be a good amount of work and stresses and forces on this thing. I'll have to think about that. And wheels, I am doing the method which I often speak about, where it's quite difficult to mask the tire and then spray the hub silver, the rim silver. So I'm doing the rim first because it's easier to either put blue tack or or a little tape mask or something. Getting exact circles like that isn't the easiest, so I often just put a bit of this blue tack, make a nice little thing, and then push it down till it's very close to a round. And I've got this very special blue tack, which I've been checking yesterday, some new blue tack that I got, which hardly sticks to anything. So won't be using that. Tail planes. So the tail plane has this method. See that? Okay, so that's got to go into the fin. Put the one side into the fin and judge how much play I've got there and judge how much play I've got there. Twisting it like that. And judging which pin or both, and in this case the front pin is more or less holding well in position, but the back pin has got an unnecessary amount of play. Check the other one. So up and down to be expected quite a bit. Front one seems not bad, back one not great, and I don't want to, like, that means you're going to be gluing into a void at some point. So taking a small bit of flash or thin plastic from something, this one happens to be a slightly yellower one, and I'm going to glue a extra bit of tab onto there. Sorry, and I'm going to glue an extra bit of tab. I'm going to cut a tiny square and put an extra one onto the back on both sides, so that even before we are at the gluing, the hope is that I have resolved some of the up-down and reduced the amount of twist. Okay, wait, I'm seeing that this one does have movement on the front as well. Okay, so I might have to do both. So that's sort of the next task. The better your plastic to plastic contact, the better your glue joint. If you have this bad alignment, and I mean this is so common amongst models on tailplane because of the thin sections and so on, and with lower quality manufacturer, you know, that and the twist, that you just end up with a bit of a bad tailplane at the end. Now of course I've already cleaned up the thin joint line, mold line in between, in the middle there. You could also possibly glue that plastic into there, but I'd rather that's sort of heading towards a little bit of a glue mess if you do it that way. So this is far easier. I'll do it on both. I mean, if you do it with a bit too much plastic, easy enough to just thin it down slightly, so you're not putting yourself in a worse position. Now then, when you finally get them in, probably best to do one at first, definitely not both at the same time. Get one nicely seated and try and get the best fit. You know, it's in, it's at it. This tail plane has got, I'm going to have to check now actually, because you could end up with dihedral on your tail plane very easily. And what I mean by that is that you glue the one side on, and let's say you thought there must have been a little bit dihedral because it seems to seat that way. So you end up with a slight dihedral on that side, and then you glue the other one to match it, and then you realize actually the aircraft doesn't have dihedral on the tailplane. Now I'm just going to have to check. The pins don't have dihedral, so what I at first thought it does have a little bit of dihedral there, I'm now going to have to go and check properly against 3-view diagrams. Easy enough if it's straight. Then you've got the 90 degree set square. You also have to watch out that you're getting that correct. Don't go and glue in the one because you don't have the other one bracing it into position, and you've done, so this one has to seat backwards because it doesn't have the pin right at the front. So, you know, an easy mistake to make would end up being to glue that one forward, and then you need to break it out later. Sanded that down, sanded all the surface detail off that. So keep remember what I said. I'm retaining the visual only because it just happens to remain on this silver plastic. Same with all of that side detail. All of that panel line detail will retain simply because it's a visual effect on the plastic now, even though it's been sanded down. So won't spray that silver, we'll only spray that with a gloss varnish, then put on the decals. So there'll be a nice little bit of weathering that goes, what's the word, brown wash, black washes after I've sprayed the tire. That needs a fair bit of work, that metal seat. Quite a number of little color details, that's sort of the highlight of the cockpit. With the pylons and the stores, I need to look at some pictures, but what I need to do is get a visual difference between everything else. So the aircraft is sort of this plastic provided silver, which happens to look exactly like this aluminium. And I've sprayed these and the stores. So now I need to choose a slight tint or something interesting to do those two stores a little bit differently, the pylons a little bit differently. Just get that slight variation in effect, so that when the thing is built, everything appears to be an extra that was put onto the aircraft, not just a one piece thing that was sprayed in one go. That's about all I can think about. Okay, we do still have masking of canopy frame and windscreen frame. Now that windscreen frame needs a little bit of cleaning up, and then we've got, I mean, even that, just those 3 panels will take, it'll take some masking. How will I do that front wheel when it's sort of, you know, all a one piece? I'll probably do that just freehand with a small brush, just gradually touching up on the tire till I've got the tire painted only. I think that's it for that. And the only last thing I can tell you before I go back and carry on with this is the parts removed from the Mariner kit that I won't be using. So far total is probably close to 50, and I think there's a bit more. So the bomb bays, bombs, the other types of propellers, and various odds and ends, some of which are already listed in the kit as won't use, and then other bits are options for the kit. So, you know, the Mariner kit starts thinning down quite nicely. I will be hanging that one up on the ceiling. I don't want it on any form of gear, which means when I put it on the table for display, yes, it'll tilt over onto its float just like a seaplane, and then it's going to get hung up and never taken anywhere again. So I will still go through and remove all, so that I've got, remove any of the last little bits that aren't going to get used. Okay. for this cockpit, I could still go and dig through some photo etch extras from other kits and put on odd details here and there. But I think with the printed paper bits that will go on, I think it provides quite adequately for the visual effect. I don't think it's necessary to go to town and just start adding a zillion things in there. Okay, happy modeling. Cheers.